College sports feels a bit like the Wild West in NIL right now, with roster management. Thank you. You laughed. And just money flying around everywhere. So we're lucky enough to have David Antoline here from UpNext, and he's going to break down the NIL situation into kind of a educational and entertaining fashion for us. So David is the chief of staff at UpNext. He's played a big role in building the modern recruiting and NIL systems that colleges rely on. And he's a longtime operator, investor, and advisor in sports technology. He spent years building these tools and helps coaches and schools understand the best way to understand how the money, talent, and decision-making really impact today's college world of sports. So with that, please welcome David Antoline for me. Thank you.
Hey everybody, can you hear me? Check, check, we good? Okay, cool. Let me try to get this remote connected. Don't need it to get going, but we'll see if this works. Afternoon. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Ellen for organizing all of this. I was telling with her earlier, she made it so easy on me that I actually never even asked where this was or what time it started until the other day because it was so easy to get all this done. So super appreciative of her for that, for Tyson for the intro, and Ashby Price was the one that actually invited me to come here and do this. So also appreciative for your time and for doing that. I'm going to be quick on the intro because this is kind of a fun topic, typically. So the best part for me, I'm going to walk around a little bit while I do this, but the best part for me about this topic is I get a free pass on, I don't know if this is going to be any good, and I certainly don't know it's going to be any better than what you guys normally have at these things, but I know for a fact that the topic's better than most of the things you have to listen to. So for me, instead of me being in a room with a bunch of other, college administrators or a bunch of other software people that are talking about this, it's actually really fun to just be in a room full of people. And I was telling Ashby earlier, one of the fun things about this topic is it's entertainment, it's sports, it's college. Most people, you're an alum of somewhere, you're a fan of some team, your kid plays sports, your nephew plays somewhere. Everybody's got you want to bet $5 on DraftKings on a Saturday afternoon, right? So everybody's kind of got something for why this means something to them. So super quick background for me. I've been in technology, not necessarily all sports, but I've been in tech for about 20 years. Started my career on the agency and consulting side in technology. Had a fun, 10 plus years of starting firms, selling firms, living all over the world, just on the tech side. But in, let's call it 2011, so 15 years ago, I actually buddied up with a couple guys that I'd worked with previously, and we had the bonehead idea that we wanted to start a company, because this is what you do. Long story, but somehow we ended up deciding that what we really wanted to do was build a company in college sports. And we had noticed a couple of quirks where there weren't really. This is the stuff that you guys would be very familiar with. It's kind of the boring side of college sports, right? Which is compliance, financial management, student athlete management, etc. There just wasn't an ERP system or anything that people could use, right? And I was coming out of the banking world and the insurance world, and we're thinking, why don't you guys have one of these, right? So again, this is 15 years ago. So I'd been in London. Moved back to the U.S. It's always fun to move around the world until you start having kids, and then you want to be back where grandparents are and everybody else is. So we moved here and started this company called ARM Software. Fast forward maybe 4 or 5 years into that adventure, and we had built a system, and again, on the compliance side, on the financial management side in college athletics, where we were maybe into 600 schools at that point. So maybe half of the NCAA was using this platform to do those things. So learned a lot very, very quickly about how college athletics work. And again, this is 10 years ago plus, right? So things have changed. We're going to talk about that. But so that was my background, though, was building a company in the space on the software side, ultimately selling that company to a platform called Teamworks. It's based at Durham. Teamworks is doing a bunch of roll-ups now on the youth side, on the pro side. We were a nice collegiate plug-in for them. Ended up going back into consulting and building another firm that got acquired. And that was fun for me because I did the Venn diagram thing where it's well, I know how to build a sports company, and you guys are making me take an executive job, and I can't just leave. So can I just be the head of sports? So for the last couple of years, I've actually been working with the NFL, the NBA, FIFA, companies like Sportradar, at scale, building out fan management and athlete management and these kinds of things from a consulting standpoint. So my background was kind of started in college, moved into kind of the pro and the NGB space, worked a lot with like the USOPC, and then ultimately, because I got really into the college and the youth space, as an investor and an advisor, I've spent most of my time in that world. So one of the companies that I was advising going back about 18 months ago, a few months ago, they asked me, hey, like, is there any way that you could actually come on board and be a part of the team here? And that company is UpNext. So I mentioned before, my first jump into this was kind of the back office stuff, right? Compliance, financial. UpNext, what I loved about this is it's all about what the athletes are actually going through. It's NIL, it's the transfer portal, it's all the pieces that are just really nasty right now that need fixed. So as of a couple of months ago, this has kind of become my full-time thing again, which is fun. I'm back in college sports, which I love. I say all of that just to kind of put this in the context of I've been around sports for a while now. So here's how I'm looking at the next, 20 minutes or so. I've got maybe two jobs, right? One is if anyone's got something that you're super interested in and I touch on that topic, just stop me. Let's talk. Like, that would be way more fun than me just going through a bunch of topics, first of all. Okay, so if you've got that, if there's something that interests you, we should do that. Second thing, based on how I kind of kick this thing off is, it's holiday party season. If you just want like 3 smart things to be able to say about college sports, like hopefully I give you 2 of those. So, when you're 2 glasses of wine in and you're kind of wishing you could leave the party, but you got to stay for another hour, like, I don't know. I'll give you something you can say at the party that at least makes you sound like you know what you're talking about, right? So at minimum, there's that. But this is, I think one of the things you'll notice about me is I love this stuff. I really do. It's been a lot of fun. This market is a mess, as I'm about to talk about. But with that, I'm going to dive in. So a lot of what I'm going to cover today, again, is a bit topical. I'm going to talk through some of this stuff. If you guys have questions, just raise your hand. You don't need to wait till the end. We don't need to make this overly formal. So I'm starting with a rhetorical question. The answer to this question is no. I think it's funny. You'll talk to people, and I'm going to get into another one of these magic words here in a second. But I'll talk to people, and if you were to give them a continuum of, okay, your 8-year-old's U9 soccer team or a pro team, and you were to say, okay, like college sports, like where do they fit? If the U9 soccer team's a 0, and pro league is 100, where are they? It's funny how many people would still go like 30, like more on the side of the youth sports team. College sports are like a 98 if pro sports are 100, right? like it is not the same as U9 soccer. It is not the same as your kid's travel team. This is professional sports. Okay, full stop. So as I'm talking through some stuff today, I think we've now got, and I'm not just talking about football. We'll talk about football a lot today, but there is almost nothing about the collegiate game at this point that mirrors amateur sports. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing, to be very clear. Like, I feel like my job is to talk about the way things work functionally and what's happened. There isn't anything, I hope, that I'm saying that is meant to be taken as like, this is a disaster, or this is the right thing to do, or anything in between. Some of these things, it's like, this is just where we are right now. Which leads us to that statement. I think the idea of college sports being composed of amateurs, there's 2 components here, right? So the first is the very literal definition of amateur, which is just the way that people actually accept compensation, right? And I think it's fair to say at this point, given some of the things that have happened, and we're going to talk about NIL a little bit, but at this point, it's pretty fair to say, outside of the employee topic that we can get into, that it's very hard to classify a college athlete at this point as being an amateur, given the fact that they're being paid to play sports. Okay, again, that is just a factual statement. That is not that's not an opinion. That's not anything else. The kids are being paid to play sports. Therefore, this idea of them being amateurs is kind of a hard one to defend, right? But I think we can also admit that there's kind of a nostalgic, tradition-based component of amateurism that I think people are also referring to sometimes, right? Like, I don't think people mean like the kids shouldn't be paid sometimes. I think sometimes people just mean like, I wish it was just simpler the way it used to be, right? Is a lot of that feeling that you get sometimes, right? Or I wish I could just think about this thing that I'm watching on a Saturday differently than this thing that I'm watching on a Sunday, right? And now I think it's confusing for folks that it's like, well, it's kind of the same damn thing, right? And frankly, like sometimes the quality is better in either direction, depending on which pro team you're a fan of and which college team you're a fan of, right? So there's a lot of that gets mixed in. But what I'll say about this is, I think while it's factual that amateurism is over, I think from an athlete's standpoint, it also means that the power in college athletics has basically been flipped upside down. So here's what I mean by that. If you were to just, for a lot of people who are fans, you're like, okay, cool, I'm on ESPN every once in a while, or I get my news from here, or I'm reading articles about this. Where do most of the articles stem from, right? They stem from the institutions, the conferences, the NCAA, now it's the CSC that was put in place by the federal government, right? So most of the articles that you're reading are about regulations being changed, schools punishing athletes, conferences making changes. If you read those at face value, it kind of feels like the same old, which is like, okay, these are all the guys that have the power, and they're enacting things that the athletes are then forced to swallow, right? But here's my first homework assignment for you guys moving forward, right? When you read those articles about college sports and you read about a policy that's been changed or you read about something that a school or a conference is doing, here's a question that I'll kind of challenge you to ask, which is, does it feel like that is something that is reactive, or I won't even say proactive, reactive or not reactive? And I think what you'll find is that most of the things that are quote unquote changing, these are reactive, right? And what I mean by that is, you see a policy change, that might look like it's, okay, the powers that be are going to do their thing. I would actually argue the opposite at this point, which is that the athletes are actually the ones with the power right now. The agents have the power because it's a freaking mess, okay? And no offense to anybody that's got a law degree in here, but who benefits the most when things are chaotic, right? It's lawyers, or in this case, agents who are oftentimes also lawyers, right? So I'm including them in this list because the athletes have the power, but it's the Wild Wild West. So the agents jump in, and the agents are single-minded, right? Their only job is to find any sort of alpha in this process and capitalize on it for themselves, for their clients, etc. And then the third piece, I have to take some blame for, right? Because people like me are out here building companies that are building algorithms that help these institutions do what they need to do and run like pro teams. But my sanity check for the algorithm piece is pretty simple. And this is true in finance, it's true in healthcare, it's true in sports. Take somebody that was an expert in something 20 years ago or whenever it was when it was different. And think about, if you ask them why they made a decision, think about what they would tell you. And they'd probably give you like a decent audit trail, right? Like, well, these are the things I considered. This is what I put it up against. I did left, right, and at the end of it, I decided to do this, and that was the decision. Then think about when a market becomes really sexy and interesting. Money starts to come in, third parties start to come in, people build stuff to make life easier, right? Ask that same person 10 years later why they made the decision, and maybe they can half explain why that decision got made. I did this, I put it in the magic box came back to me, and then I made one more decision, right? Fast forward 10 more years, what's the answer? I don't know, the computer told me to do it, right? I don't know. I don't know why we invested in that. I don't know why we picked that kid. I don't know why, we had that care plan for that patient. It's like, I put it in the computer, and what came back was do this, right? That is now where we are with college sports. And it's on the recruiting side, on the NIL side, so you're talking about roster building, we're talking about financial management. There are enough tools out there, and again, like guilty as charged, but there are enough tools out there to help these institutions do what is fairly complex at this point, that a lot of times, like, these decisions aren't even being made by people that know why these decisions are being made, okay? So all I'm doing is kind of setting the table here for athletes have the power, we're going to talk about that. Agents are involved, that makes it a little messy, and there's a lot of tools out there that are running some of these pieces. Here's where it gets a little confusing, though. So athletes have the power, great. I can say this in this room, sometimes I'm in other places, and people are like, I don't know where Virginia Tech is, but I was from Western Pennsylvania when I decided to go to VT, so until I moved to Richmond, I was never around other people that knew like what Tech was, but here, any Hokies in here? 1, 2, okay. So anybody remember, give me one name in In 1999 to 2000, give me the only name that matters for Virginia Tech and what changed everything. Michael Vick, right? So here's a crazy thing to think about, right? And we could talk about this for a long time and geek out on it, and we don't have time for this. But think about and I'm going to be reductive about this. And yes, like I'm a sports guy, so maybe I'm biased on this. But think about the status of Virginia Tech today versus when I went there in 1999. And I am telling you, like, I will stand on a hill and tell you that 80% of that value was generated by one dude, okay? Because that school's profile, and it's all driven by the number of applicants, and we can get into all that stuff. But so that is the impact that athletics can have. And and the reason I picked that example is I'm old. That was 25 years ago, right? And that was still true 25 years ago, before the NIL stuff, before everything else. Here's the difference. What did Tech have to do for Michael to get him to come there? I'm not talking about brown bags and envelopes and all that stuff. I don't know anything about that. And it's not, there's always been a little bit of that. But basically, they just had to convince a kid from Hampton Roads to say, hey, you can ball here. You can start pretty quickly. We're in a conference we think we can be competitive in. And if you do all of those things, we think you can get the kind of exposure and growth that you need to go pro. And for that, tuition, room and board, I don't know. That's about it, right? It was about the team. It was about, hey, Tech's going to win, and you're going to benefit from that. And the advantage you get from that is that someday you'll get drafted, and somebody else will pay you, right? It won't be us. It's not going to be Tech, but somebody will pay you some money if you do all these things. Things have changed so much that now you have the CSC, so the College Sports Committee, which was put in place by the federal government this year, right? You have the CSC that actually has fair market value guidance for athletes that explains what every athlete is worth, okay? And that's based on this, I'm looking at it now because sometimes I forget, but availability, reach, and on-field performance, which basically means what sport do you play, what position do you play, how popular are you, and how good are you at what you do. But not just how good are you, it's all of those things, okay? So if Mike Vick was coming to Tech today, there are like 4 months of negotiations around how those details factor into what he is going to get paid. And that has 2 commas in it, okay? To come play at that school before there's any talk of NFL or any talk of growth or anything else. I am not saying that is a bad thing, because it is also ridiculous that Mike Vick got tuition and nothing else to add billions of dollars to VT's bottom line. Okay, so you can argue both sides of this. This is not a good, bad, or otherwise conversation, but just to put it in context of how much things have changed, every single athlete that walks through the door is having fair market value conversations with that school about whether they're getting what is owed to them before they ever step foot on campus. It's different, okay? And even 10 years ago, it's different. And that is happening, and that's put in place by the CSC. So this isn't like you can't blame the kids, you can't blame the schools, really. This is where we are, right? So, question.
How often can they update? Like, do they refresh it every year, or how does it continue? And you go in and you're not very valuable, and you turn out to be a superstar, like in year 2.
Not only that, you can, and all right, so I'll do a little inside baseball here. I'll never name names, but you can be in week 4 of your football season as a second stringer, and the starter goes down, and you play that game, and things are going pretty well, and you end up on SportsCenter. You can have your agent call the AD that afternoon and say, hey, you got 2 options. We're either going to the transfer portal, or that number's 300K, and that 300K is here in the next 4 months. That's how it works, okay? So that's how insane it's become, right? At minimum, even if you don't want to have that negotiation stance, you can just enter the portal. And the next season, you can find a school that's willing to pay you $350 instead of $125.
How about the other way? Shoot, I mean, that's the other way. I work $2 million and be like, stay or whatever.
So we can talk about that a little bit. The controls are not as formulated on that side of the equation. And this is why we talk about it being chaotic right now. This is part of and honestly, this is why the agents have as much power as they have right now. And that's why I say, like, I know when you read these articles, it sounds like, oh my gosh, the schools and the hammer is coming down in the NCAA, and I'm like, no. Any athlete that knows what power they're carrying, that is a very easy conversation. There's no other way to put it. That is a very easy conversation for any athlete to have with their athletic department if they're willing to go there, which is, new plan, I want this. If you can't do it, I will find somebody who does.
So you said earlier, every single athlete going to college today is having these conversations. Now, we're kind of potentially talking about football, but are we talking about cheerleaders, swimmers, soccer players? See what I mean?
Yes, but scale. Okay, so even, I won't even say even, I'm not, because I've, love all sports and have been involved in nearly all of them, right? But regardless of the sport, gender, anything else, NIL is now just a part of the quote-unquote package that you are getting when you come on campus. Even if you're in the least attractive sport from a financial standpoint, from the school's perspective, and you're the fourth string, this, that, and the other, you're still going to have conversations around, it's like any other comp package, right? It's like, okay, base salary looks like this. I've got bonuses that look like this. I've got a little bit of incentive, this, that, and the other. The only thing that's missing is no one owns stock in these colleges yet, right? I'm sure that's coming, right? But for now, that's the only thing that's missing. So, yes.
Can I ask a question? So you said that they can own stock, but a lot of it's funded by gifts that are tax deductible. And they also have this hedge fund that's an endowment at all these universities.
Yeah.
So they have their professional sports teams with a hedge fund with a non-taxable status. How's that sustainable?
Well, I don't think that it is. Yeah. So quickly, I'll break it down to the way it's set up right now. And I don't even remember if I get to this later, so I'll just cover it now, and then we can skip over it later. But the way it's set up right now, so the deal with the big judgment that came down a little bit earlier this year was we're going to set up the salary cap. That is straight up pay for play. That is $20 million, 20-something million dollars that every school has that they can just hand out. Okay. It doesn't have to go through. You don't have to be sponsoring anything. There's nothing required from the athlete other than you have to play there. There's more. I'm oversimplifying all of this just because it's easier to have this conversation, right? So there is a bucket of money that is a salary cap. Then there's NIL, and NIL has specific rules around how an athlete can be paid, but that's where you get into fair market value. It's also where you get into the process of, hey, there is an entity that is paying you to do it's is it a local car dealership? Is it McDonald's? Is it whatever? But they are requiring something of you for that money, right? You can't just collect the check, in theory. According to the rules, you can't just collect the check, right? You have to do something. You have to post about it. You have to go do an event. You have to speak at one of their things or whatever, right? So you're doing something based on fair market value. They can pay you some amount of money. That gets reviewed now by the CSC. There's a whole thing called NIL Go that's been stood up that's supposed to review this stuff. So those are the buckets that exist. Then there's this gray area that still starts to tap. So you already have the salary cap money that's coming out of the school's balance sheet. And then you have this, but we also raised this other money back when there were collectives. And technically the collectives aren't supposed to do anything anymore because the 20 million's there. Right, so you don't need the collectives anymore. That was the whole thing, was let the schools do it. Don't have this side org. Except the collectives still have balance sheets of 20, 30, 50, 100 million bucks. And they're like, but we want to use it still, right? I won't name names, but most Power 4 schools are like, we have $70 million in a bank account that we were kind of hoping we could use for this. So they'll find ways, right? So it's complicated, but it's not sustainable. Your question. Ashby?
Is there any type of indirect conference premium where the quarterback's going to play Pitt, they pay him $1 million, but if he's going to an SEC school, that you want to pay him $1.5 million?
100%. Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's very much. And some of that is formalized, and some of that is frankly just. And again, I'll stick with football just because it's the most visible. But Texas Tech right now is getting all the publicity because they had one guy who's like, I don't care, whatever. His joke was kind of like, hey, whatever number you throw out is not going to be interesting to me. I'm not buying a pro team yet, so 50 million, 100 million, whatever. And yeah, they basically just said, what is so and so offering you? Tack 50% on top of it. come on down. Like, Lubbock will have you, and they're doing all right. So,
This is essentially a Power 4 conversation. University of Richmond, we have 16 sports. We pay NIL and football, it's just basketball, men's and women's, and that's it.
correct.
So we lose a lot of athletes, but most schools aren't paying their athletes.
And I'm going to get to that in a second, because I think it's that middle tier that's very interesting, right? Particularly as this starts to kind of come together and we figure out a way that's sustainable. I do think that, whether it's FCS schools on the football side, or you just look at that whole tier of, even, the group of 5 schools, right, in football are struggling a little bit with, like, they're like, well, our number is not $20 million, it's 7, So how do we play in this game? It is not even right now by any stretch of the imagination, right, in terms of how that works. Really quickly, I think this is only interesting in the sense that so in the old days, right, you still had to worry about scholarship allocation. So, if you've had kids that have gone through this, or you yourselves have gone through this, right, it was always like, okay, well, am I on a full ride? Am I on a half ride? Every sport had allocations that you can't go over a certain number of scholarships depending on the sport that you play, right? Then the collectives came in. Now you've got, of course, you've got NIL money that's layered on top of that. So it's complicated now because you've got the question of what's the school even willing to pay out overall, right? So Richmond's got an answer for that. Georgia's got an answer for that, et cetera. So you have that kind of top level conversation. Then you have, okay, well, we have this much money. Can we also get some money from third parties? What does that look like, et cetera? But you also need to build a real roster, right? Like, people play positions and and the other problem is with the transfer portal, you can have a full roster that you love, and you can have a sophomore and a junior that you were expecting to be there for the next couple of years that decide that, hey, I had a great season at Richmond, now I'm going to go play for Tech. And now all of a sudden you thought that slot was done. WR1 was set for the next 2 years. WR1 now lives in Blacksburg, right? So now what are you going to do? Well, now you got to go find your one. Are you going to go steal him from somebody else? And so it's very complicated. And the only other thing I'll say about this is, for years and years and years and years and years, we've talked about recruiting for the most part as being high school, right? And schools are very good at recruiting high school athletes. They're pretty good at recruiting high school athletes. I don't know if they're very good. I think if you're a rock star and you're in North Dakota, I think it's still going to be hard to be seen versus being in some other places. But generally speaking, high school recruiting, pretty straightforward. The idea of recruiting from everybody else's team is still brand new. Because in the old days you had to sit a year, or you had to be in a grad program. There were just it just made it hard to try to pull in a kid. So you've basically got like half of your recruiting at some schools. Other schools like Clemson, they don't deal with this. But most schools, like half the kids now, or 25% of the kids, are coming from other schools. It takes like 4 times the amount of staff to do that, because when you're recruiting from colleges, you've got video, you've got game. It's not high school. You can kind of be okay with the fact that the kid's 16 years old and went to school in some middle of nowhere Texas, and the best you have is like mom's iPhone video. You can't be okay with that if you're taking a kid from another school. So anyway, it takes a lot more effort, and that's how this is being run. Anybody have seen all the coaches that got fired last couple weeks? So here's an opinion on that, real quick. Let me conscious of time too, excuse me. So, okay. Here's how I'll word this. I know, you see any of these articles and immediately you think like, oh my gosh, these guys are so stupid, right? The buyout clause, they hired this freaking guy, they paid all this money for this team, he couldn't get it done. And I get that. But everything we're talking about, this is chaos right now, right? So, we talk about raising money and where does that money come from? And how does that get allocated? Well, as all these rules keep changing, the schools have to then continually allocate how much money is actually going out the door to athletes. Obviously, coach salaries are going up, et cetera. And the argument, of course, is that, well, but the valuation of the program is also going up, which justifies that, and that might be true, but it doesn't necessarily dictate cash flow, right? So you do all this work, and you beg your donors, and you beg your alums, and you beg everybody for another 20 mil so that you can do the thing, and then you place bets. You place bets on coaches, you place bets on athletes, right? And some schools, like Texas Tech, it's kind of working. Other schools like Penn State, not so much, right? So you got 2 choices. It's still chaotic. It's going to be chaotic for the next couple of years. So I've heard the argument made that like, okay, so Penn State owes James Franklin $40 million or $50 million over the next couple of years. He can't be that bad. What if you just spend $40 million on players? Because they're just lighting it on fire to give it to him at this point, because he's not even coaching there, right? So what if you actually just took the 40 mil and said, hey, James, we wish you were a 10. Kind of seemed like you're a 7 or an 8, but we're just going to go buy you some new players, and you can't suck that bad. Everybody says you're kind of good, right? Like, what if that's the answer? And maybe we beat Ohio State. The problem is, now you got to go get more money, which means you need to go back to the same people that you just made bad bets with their money on and say, hey, I need some more. Trust us this time. He's going to get there. So that's one option. And things are still chaotic. You don't know if the rules are going to change next year. Or you say, you know what? I think it was James's fault. Screwed up. We're gonna take it on the chin. We're gonna say it was his fault. He gets fired. It's gonna take us 2 years to rebuild while everything's still chaotic. And it's basically like being in an asset class or an investment class where everything's kind of gone haywire, and some people just move to the sidelines, right? Like push that risk to zero, move to the sidelines, hold on to the cash. I think some of these schools, honestly, this is their play at saying, we don't want to make another bad bet. And the easiest thing that we can do right now, and we'll take it in the media and people tell us we're stupid and we don't understand how the dollars work, but I think they looked at it and they're like, you know what, screw it. Like, you're out. Sure, we'll pay the money or we won't. The lawyers will figure that stuff out. What we're really doing, though, is we're just buying ourselves 2 years where everybody lets us reset. And by the time we get through those couple of years, things will have changed, and now we think we have a shot. So it's kind of a funny thing that's happening. And again, all of those schools wish they could have won, of course. Does Penn State wish they were getting ready for the playoff? Yes, but they're not. And I think the big way of dealing with that is to actually just make it as easy as possible. Yes?
Yeah, you used the word things will change. I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about the legal stuff going on here? I mean, you know, one thing, if you're an investor, or as someone in the investment business, I always think about like investment cases that have had to be derailed at the stroke of a pen, which basically means like the government saying you could do this before, now you can't, or your reimbursement for this was X, 40% X. Like, where are we on that continuum? You talked about the CSC, but I'm just curious.
So
Here's something else that can happen next year or two.
I will is the answer. It's not even can. It's will. Yeah. Here's the biggest problem, right? Is that the NCAA, now you have the CSC, right, which is not the NCAA. So you have these. Now you have another regulatory body, right? That one was put in place by the government. NCAA, not so much. So now you have two regulatory bodies, kind of. I mean, the CSC, I don't think they would describe themselves as that. I think they describe themselves as like a clearinghouse, basically, right? I mean, that's in financial terms, right? That's technically what they're doing. But to be fair, like this is true in finance too, right? If you're a clearinghouse, like you kind of have the power to some degree, right? So the biggest problem is the second, and I say problem not that I think that it was the wrong thing, because it's also ridiculous that the athletes weren't making any money probably, but what happened was the second there was admission that the athletes should be sharing in the money, every single rule that is in the NCAA bylaws can, will, and should be challenged by some athlete or some athlete's lawyer at some point, right? Because the second I miss out on 100K, because bylaw 13.4.5 said some BS that frankly, like, probably doesn't even apply anymore, you better believe, like, there's probably an attorney somewhere in the US that's like, I'll help you with that, right? So it's going to be lawsuit, and reaction to that. So the NCAA is going to have to figure out, like, where do they fit in all of this? But the bigger question is, it's going to force rule changes. And, you know, right now the cap's 20 mil. And then there are all these NIL rules. If that 20 mil went to 50, that's different. If it went to 5 again, that's different. Other thing I'll just call out, I've got a slide on it later, but it doesn't matter. This is basically employment without legal employment is where we are right now. I mean, everybody is being paid to play for these schools, right, at any level. At some point, employment without it being real employment will become real employment. That is, I'm saying that is an opinion, not a fact, to be fair. But that is an opinion that's shared by, I feel like, most of the attorneys in the space that understand what's happening. When that happens, that changes a lot of things. Most importantly, the players will unionize at that point. So you will have a players association for NCAA athletes that looks a lot like the NFLPA and the NBAPA. And now, obviously, the players association is going to push for certain things in certain ways. So structurally, that's why I say, like, I think it's at least a couple of years of chaos because of that. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned like way back when it was just not even thought about, should we pay the college players, and it was debated, you know, for I don't even know how many years, decades, that
Long time.
y'all, like, you and your buddies, like, is this gonna creep down into like high school?
It already is. This is the problem, right? I don't actually. Let me rephrase it. This is a problem. I've already mentioned like 8 of them, so it can't be the problem. We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah. I've got one for you in a couple slides. Yeah, I mean, in some states, it's already creeped from the high school. Listen, the playbook is always the same, right? And I don't put it on the kids. I just don't. Some kid who's 15 years old has somebody in his circle who is an adult who decides that that kid should be, you know, he's the next second coming of this. And they want, you know, oh, well, the college kids are getting paid. You know, my nephew should get paid. Who can I hire that can help us make this public? Okay, well, Bob the lawyer is gonna, you know, go on ESPN and scream about it. So, and you know, and the next thing you know, here we go. And there are multiple states right now where the states have not been able to block payments to high school kids. So this is already happening. I don't know where that stops, to be honest with you. That's a whole other can of worms. But it's not like hard to imagine that if someone who is now negotiating, you know, their college contract is able to come up. I mean, and the numbers are ridiculous. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day. They're like, kid's a third string tackle at UCF, and he's making $275 this year. I don't even, like, that doesn't make any sense on any level. Okay, like, so, you know, and he's a sophomore. So it's like, okay, well then what's to stop the all-star senior in a Texas high school from making some money? So.
Case. I appreciate you putting my name in that algorithm.
Hey, I joke with my clients all the time. I'm like, I can play 4-string quarterback like the best of them. You know, I know that's worth at least $100. You know. All right, here's another one for you then. So this is one. Here's another one. David's opinion, not fact. Clearly, if it was fact, then everybody would know about it. I think in football, this is coming down to 2 conferences. So. You've got, so the Pac-12 is going to resurrect itself next year, and so most people are like, well, wait a minute, I don't understand. Like, we're going from 4 to 5 again, like it's the other direction. It's like, no. Like, that's just, that's procedural in the sense that they were pissed off that they lost all their schools, so they went through the channels they needed to rebuild the way they wanted to. And I can't even get into all the reasons for why I think this is going to happen. I can promise you it's also based on some backroom conversations and all the rest. But here's the reality. There are, and I know people hate to hear this. I kind of hate to hear it. But if you think about the way the schedules are set right now, if you think about just a lot of the decisions that are made around how, you know, certainly basketball and football, how all this works, you can't possibly, you know, when the numbers start to go from the millions to the hundreds of millions to the billions in terms of the dollars that are floating around, at some point, I don't care how much you like playing your rival game every year, if that cost you $500 million, I'm making this up, right? That's a ridiculous number, but if that costs you $10 million a year or $40 million a year in revenue, because for whatever reason, right? Because you have to travel there or because it's actually not a sexy game anymore, at some point, like, they're going to stop building schedules based on tradition, and it's going to be like, no. Let's just do it fairly. Well, what happens then? It's like, well, what does that look like? If only there were pro leagues that had already modeled this, right? Well, guess what? Like, what does every pro league look like? Well, it looks like 2 conferences with divisions underneath. We can get into what these joint ventures could and might look like and how the schools actually do this without it being part of the school and all the rest, but I will tell you that here's a ridiculous story. I'll tell you really quick. I want to be conscious of the time here. I was talking to a Power 4 school 2 days ago. I won't say who. They are taking a home game in 2 years, and they're moving it off-site. So it's a home game, out of conference, scrub opponent. They were already paying to come in to get beat anyway. They are taking that game off campus because the rules right now state that if your game is off campus and the game itself is managed by a third party, that's really considered like an event more than it is a game that's on your campus, which means that every player playing in that game can get paid as though they are working that event for that third party. So they're basically taking a home game that people could attend on. I mean, think about how ridiculous this is in college sports. Like, the whole point is to have home games, right? Like, they're taking a game off campus, moving it off site. The third party is going to run it, so that they can. It'll be about, I think the number was $17 million for the players only that they can generate in that one game, because donors are sick of paying into this. So they're going to generate it that way, pay the players out of that, and it's fair market value, because it's like, well, the game wouldn't be as exciting if the players were on the field. Okay. This is the shenanigans, right? So, and the reason I tie it back to this is, at some point, someone's got to be like, time out. This is crazy. I mean, we're taking away home games so that you can make an extra 10 mil. Like, what if we just set up a league and everybody made an extra 200 mil? Like, wouldn't that? So I am putting this out here as, give it 5 years, but it's probably not 10 years. Before football, for sure. Basketball's a little different because the NCAA owns enough of those rights that I think it's harder to unwind. But yes.
What is the trickle-down effect of small Division III schools?
Yeah. So, I mean, man, Division III. Here's the thing. I think D2 and D3 are actually, not only do I think they're kind of safe, I actually think they become more attractive in a lot of ways. The biggest impact on D3 and D2 schools, and even JUCOs and NIAs at this point, has been that you're basically terrified that all your good kids are going to leave every season. That's the part that's rough, right? Because the second one of your kids has a good season, they're thinking transfer portal, get paid. And that is an impact that's negative. But let's say whether or not this happens, it doesn't matter. All the money is going to be trapped in 75 schools, right? At some point, the other schools have to figure out, like, I think I even went there from here. Yeah, all the other schools are going to have to figure out, like, well, who are we? Why is this fun? And I actually think that then you get kind of that nice, like, well, we're not spending, to the gentleman's point before, Richmond's not going to spend $40 million a year on college athletes, right? So, not saying, or they will, right? Liberty will. But, so I think that becomes a question of, I think the smaller schools get to lean into the fact that, like, hey, you can come here, you can still get an education, you can still play ball, it's a lot of fun, we still have that environment, alums still care about it. The only thing that'll probably be a little bit tricky, and it'll get trickier, is just trying to stop that flow of kids in. But the one thing I'll say is, even the big schools, though, are absolutely sick and tired of everybody switching teams. I think this whole transfer portal thing it's gone too far in the other direction. So what will help smaller schools is if they start putting more controls on that process so that kids can't just bounce, right? So then NCAA. NCAA runs the transfer portal. They're the ones that put the rules in place as they are right now. And that was a total reaction to what was happening, where the kids were complaining, and rightfully so. The kids were like, my coach just left, but I'm stuck at Florida. So they went the completely opposite direction. They're like, oh, just do whatever you want. Yes.
Would the conferences, let's say the Big 12 and SEC, would they be able to break away from the NCAA and form their own governing body?
I mean, they've already threatened it. So the answer is probably yes, if they really wanted to. There's a lot of moving parts in that. I think the trickier thing with the NCAA is that the NCAA kind of has like 5 different roles. They are the governing body, but like not in football because ownership structures differently. But in basketball, the NCAA actually owns the NCAA tournament. That's their revenue. They are not going to give up $5 billion lightly. So they'll probably give up the regulation, no problem, unless they're just so power hungry that they don't want to. But the money, that's harder. So it's a big unwind to say that the NCAA would just be like, okay, you're right, we screwed up. Y'all take it, and we'll just go back to day job. So it's tricky. Yes.
What's the SEC and Big Ten thing about this guy Jimmy Saxton? Like it's like a kingmaker for all of this.
I mean, that's a hard question.
Because it's like, if he is an agent for all these coaches, it's just like hard. Like, it's crazy. He just can play with whoever and he like makes it all. It's on market.
I know. I think that I'll answer it this way. They hate it is the short answer, obviously. Not just that. I mean, yes, what he's doing, but also just, I think they just hate the fact that so much is, like, there's too much fluidity, I think is what they would say. But the problem is, like, they've kind of lost control over it. So now it's like, okay, well, it sucks that all this is happening with the coaches and the athletes, but now it's like, okay, but we got to hold on to our money. So it's pretty nasty, though, right now, you know? Yeah.
I guess, where is like Main Street sit on this? Because I'm sitting here, I can always speak for myself, I'd love to hear whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, do you think they should get paid something? Probably yes. Is this freaking insane? Probably yes, right? And like, is that kind of the house, you're talking about transfer stuff.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get this to like a happier meeting? Is that when they organize in 5 years or whatever? Or it just seems like we went from these kids were treated terribly, you know, to the kind of fourth string down that was making all this money. How do we?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I watch Alabama or Ohio State or some big football school that I have always enjoyed watching, but don't really care about.
Yeah.
And I don't even know who any of the players are. Is that for the right?
It is. It is. I think, correct. I think, I mean, it can't be where it is right now, right, for a lot of reasons. I say that. I'll play devil's advocate for a second, though. I forget the guy's name from Texas Tech, but the guy that wrote all the big checks, right? There you go. Yeah. So, you know, he made the comment the other day. He's like, listen, college football is the second biggest sport in the U.S., and we all know what the numbers are for the NFL. So he's like, I know y'all are giving me a hard time about, you know, a couple $100 million that I'm passing through, but he's like, the NFL, though, is like 10x what this is. So his argument was there's not enough money in the game. Strange argument, and I don't think that anybody, like, that's a hard one to swallow when it used to be zero. Okay. But his argument is like, maybe it should be more. So I don't know how quickly that gets sorted, but yeah, I mean, at some point it has to even out a little bit. I think one of the bigger things is when employment comes in, if employment comes in, I shouldn't say when, that's just an opinion. If employment structures come in legally, you're going to see contracts that are more tied to performance. Then you start to get into bonus structures versus, I mean, right now it's just stupid, right? Like, it's like, you're coming here and we're going to give you $500K. There's no, you can see the field, not see the field. There's not a bonus at all. I mean, that's bizarre, right? Like, for any executive, like, I wish I got those deals, right? Like even in years where I've made a lot of money, like, it was still in a bonus, you know what I mean? I still had to sell my company. So, like, something has to happen to where it's at least tied to, hey, there's a base salary. I'm making this up, right? It's not, but there's a base salary. There are escalators in that salary. There are bonuses. That will rein it in to a certain extent. People are still going to want the books to line up and all the rest, but it's got to be some version of that, right? For sure. Yes.
For what percentage of schools that participate in SBA and actually providing positive?
I mean, there's probably two ways to look at that, right? One is the opportunity. One is the Virginia Tech story, which is what if. What if we could win the national championship? What if we could get on, you know, even Texas Tech right now probably feels like they're winning just because someone's talking about Texas Tech, right? No offense to them, but outside of Texas, like, who cares, right? Well, people care now, right? So there's that side, which is like, well, you do it just in case, right? You have the Doug Flutie, Mike Vick, like, you know, enrollment goes up by 65, or applications go up by 65% of billions of dollars, right? Amazing. The other side of it is, what happens if you don't do it? Your coach at Nebraska, he cracks me up all the time when he talks, but he's very honest, right? Matt will just lay it out the way it is, where he's like, listen, guys, like, I think this is stupid, but if we don't do this, here's what that means, right? That means that we're not going to have this, which means I can't go get this kid, which means I'm going to get back up on this podium in 6 months, and y'all are going to call me an idiot. So we can do it, or we cannot do it, but let's just play it out. So I think the answer is certainly in the Power Four and even in Group of Five. You know, so now you're talking about what, 300 schools or so. I think all of them feel the pressure to find their own version of how to operate in this world, and not all of them. It doesn't mean $50 million a year for all of them, right? But I think then as you get into FCS, I'll leave D2 and D3 kind of out of this because I don't think they have to operate. Then I think you get into you just got to. I mean, it's like being a mid-sized company and trying to take on the big boys, right? Like you got to find a way to be operationally interesting. You have to find a way to offer incentives to people that are different than financial. So they're still going to play the game, right? I mean, if I'm running a 400-person, I've competed against Accenture plenty of time running a 500-person firm, right? Like you don't beat Accenture by trying to be them, right? There was always something different you had to do. So I think there's creativity in there. Everybody's going to have to play to something. But it's like any other company, right? These schools, and this is a problem because these schools are not used to thinking, right? They're used to just being like, I don't know, like people come to school here. You know what I mean? Like we're in Blacksburg or we're in Lubbock or we're in Lincoln or whatever, right? And so schools for so long have been like, well, of course people are going to ball here. This is where they live, right? So they're not used to selling themselves in that way. It's a different world, and that's all the way down.
So as a CC, they talk about fair market value.
Yeah.
Do they work you so like connect the dots to, or is it? I'm sure like how do you? What are the metrics to judge the fair market value? Because if you're running like this kind of cash flow on a player, what metrics are you looking at? How are you figuring that out? Like
How accurate is that process?
yeah.
I would say highly inaccurate at the moment. I would also say that right now we are in the like more is better world for most of the schools.
So
Yeah.
the way you're describing it, it's almost like we're going to pay for about $500,000 $2 million. We can kind of shoot blindly. People are just thinking this is going to be worth more over time. So we're not just going to head the curve.
Correct.
I think you want to be in two conferences, so it's like a land grab
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Like you're fighting.
So it's like
over-
shoot from the
It's honestly, I mean, I hate to say this because it sounds very like not that exciting, but it's like it's risk management to a degree, right? It's like to your point, it's like we can't go 0-12, right? Like, so it's a lot of that, and because I totally agree with you, right? I think especially for you guys, but I've lived in the finance world enough to like when you think fair market value, like that's a two-sided conversation. This is a one-sided version of fair market value, which is there is a model that says that if you are this, then any one deal probably shouldn't exceed X. That has jack to do with what you're actually producing for the brand or the university, right? The only thing that has to do with is like, we're going to prevent, Bobby Donor from giving you $1 million on the side of the table because you came and spoke to his kid's 5th grade classroom about leadership, right? Like that's literally the only thing that it stops, is that, right? Yeah, it's a great question though. Yes.
For business table from the schools at all, I mean, it's becoming a kind of secondary professional need.
Yeah.
Schools are becoming increasingly relevant, right?
I don't.
They wear Georgia uniforms, but what is it really Georgia?
There have been so many models floated, including by the conferences, of how they would split out, how that would look. So, does it end up being some sort of JV where there's another entity set up and it's partially owned by the school? And that's an option. At some point, unless things get reined in, at some point the school can't possibly manage, right? So I think the answer is no one does.
If every rule's being challenged, like talk about eligibility earlier, like why 4 years? Why not 4? How is that not going to be challenged?
This is-
Why does it matter if I get at least 2.0 GPA or whatever it is?
That is exactly the issue. It's like, I mean, and those are great examples.
Baseball, but it's not like the championship in England or something like that. It's almost like there needs to be a totally professional league that's below.
And the downstream impact of that is, so let's say you play, let's say you're on the women's volleyball team, right? So the numbers are a lot lower, but there was just a ruling in football that says that your GPA doesn't matter anymore. Well, let's just say that you have a really bad semester and you get a 1.9. You might be like, hold on a second, like, it's not about money for me, I know, but like, I want to keep playing. You told Bobby he could play, right? So there are implications even when it's not about the money, right? Even if it's at a school that isn't paying out a bunch of money, you might still have athletes at those schools that are like, but this is BS. Like, you guys said that 1.5 was enough for him to play. Like, I want to play with my 1.5, right? So yeah, I don't know I certainly don't know the answer to your question in terms of like, can it stick with the schools? I don't think there's any possible, I mean, like these stadiums cost like $1 billion, right? So, I mean, there are physical investments that are going to have to maintain. There are associations with brand that I imagine would have to maintain because that's part of the value of these institutions, right? Like Tennessee football isn't much if it isn't orange and white and associated with Tennessee. But Tennessee can't keep just shelling out $100 million a year. So what's the, yeah, right?
Admitted that this is an insane environment.
Yeah.
Is there any potential for there to be transparencies as a cure for reining in?
So here's the thing, right? It's a great question. I think so because I made a slide about it. No, in all seriousness, no. And this is, I mean, hell, I hope people say this about like my company right now is that we're trying to do this, right? But I think I mentioned before that schools, they haven't had to worry about some of these things in the past. In their defense, right? Even like on the recruiting side, like they just don't have recruiters that know how to think about NIL, right? They know how to watch tape. So, you know, and they didn't typically have 500-person staffs. They have like 3 guys in the basement that are GAs. They get paid $15K a year and have to work at, you know, Wendy's in the evenings to pay rent. Like that's the reality of it, right? So on this topic, nobody has needed to be transparent for 50 years. NCAA just puts it all in their pocket and everybody's good. This has to happen. You know, and even say what you want about the NFL or the NBA or whatever, but like those leagues they're transparent in the sense that like if somebody asked you, if you have a favorite pro team and someone asked you to like talk about how that roster got formed and what that does to the salary cap, you could probably give a pretty good explanation. You might not agree with it. You might be like, our owners are, you know, whatever. GM doesn't know what he's doing, whatever. But you can probably explain it. Can anyone explain why any of this is happening in college sports right now? And the answer is no. That answer has to be yes for any of this to work, right? You have to be able to describe why you're investing in a player and why $1 million for a second string quarterback. You know, like some of these things, and even just as a business, right? You have to be able to. The running argument right now, and you've seen the Big Ten take in some PE money, right? It's like, oh, but our valuations are now in the tens and whatever of billions of dollars, and it's like, okay, but if you're playing, I mean, you guys know this better than I do. You want to play that card? That is a different set of financials. Like you don't get to play funny money if you're talking about the valuation of the program as an asset, right? Totally different conversation. I know we're over time. Real quick, just one more on the transparency and integrity side. This is the other problem. The more gambling ends up in the news, the more the betting problem is surfacing. You're seeing it with the pro leagues right now. MLB's got a problem. NBA's got a problem. Frankly, everybody has a problem. It's just a question of who reports it and who gets caught. It's not a surprise. Like 19-year-old kids are not in the best position to be, forced by adults to do things that they otherwise probably would not do. I'm not absolving them of all the blame, but like these kids are not. I mean, hell, the 2 guys from the Guardians got paid $5K to throw 4 extra pitches an inning. The guy's making $20 million over 3 years, and he took $5,000 to, and that's a pro player. I don't even know how does that then translate to a 19-year-old who might be offered $20,000? It's not good, right? So there is, I can geek out on this for a long time because I've had DraftKings and FanDuel and some of these other companies as clients in the past, and there is some really good stuff that's happening on the data side in that way. I've tried to turn this around a couple times with people that have been like, this is insane, the betting stuff, and I'm like, okay, here's a slightly different view though. How do you think they got caught? And the answer is, you guys know this from, if you think about the way the clearinghouses work in financial services, the answer is like the data and the algorithms are actually catching up to like FS level quality. So it's actually pretty easy to detect anomalies in betting patterns, particularly if they're done through legal channels. So you can see pretty quickly if something was typically at like 120K and it bumps up to 325. It doesn't take much. FanDuel knows probably within 0.7 seconds that that's happening, and they can shut it down. So that's good news, but the question is what's going to be made available to, again, like there has to be integrity in this process. And right now, it's just all so in the air right now. Last thing, I know we're over. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Question you asked earlier, right? Which is, okay, Main Street, everyone probably thinks that the athletes should get some money, but maybe not, $3 million at the bench. I mean, you would have.
Like making the belts involved are crazy. It's like
There's a lot of crazy.
That guy, you're like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Here's what's already happening, and it's going to happen more and more. And it's funny. Somebody earlier called out, like, we were talking about, like, you'll sit down and watch Georgia, or you'll watch whoever because, big name, Saturday afternoon. But you're like, I don't know who these people are. So one thing that's going to happen, and I live in the UK for a while, and if you look at soccer in the UK, you got like 13 and 14-year-olds that are already superstars, and people know who they are, they know which academy they're with. Because it's all kind of been legal there for a long time. Like, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, like, has always been a part. There are regulations, but here's where I'm going with this. We are putting formulas in front of kids and saying that the way you get paid is if you play this sport at this position and you have this many followers on Instagram and you have this level of reach and you have this. The formula's out there. Okay, this is no different than if somebody, God bless her, my 8th grade daughter is like, I want to be an influencer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and she's like, I know how to do it. Like, and I'm like, I'm sure you do. Like, it's not what we're doing in our house, but I'm so glad that it's a path for you. The formula is there, right? The formula is there for athletes. And I think what we're going to find is, I mentioned before, like, the athletes have the power right now. They are literally sending their agents to the AD 3 minutes after the game ends to say, I had a good game, pay me more. Okay, that is where we are with all of this. That will probably not keep going, but what I can promise you is that you are going to start to see younger and younger athletes who are not just like posting on Instagram and all the stuff that's happening right now, but you're going to start to see like real brands built around athletes that are still in high school or coming out of high school. Braun was like one example of this, and he's like one of 5 probably that you could point to where it was like, that guy was a known entity before he ever stepped foot on NBA court. You're about to see like 300 of those come through because the incentives are too high for that not to be the case. And the reason I say I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing is, at the extreme level, it's definitely a bad thing. But on the other hand, it's like, I don't know, this is what we're telling the kids is valuable. So I don't know, at least it's entrepreneurial of them to like figure out how to create that. The problem is they get terrible advice around them. And so, I didn't even touch on the agent stuff, but you've got agents that are going to schools and doing deals for kids that they've never met. So they'll say, hey, if you can get me $1 million for Bobby, he'll transfer. So they do the deal. Not real, they get the verbal. Then they go to Bobby and they're like, hey, my name's David. Nice to meet you. I can get you $1 million at that school. So just totally playing the shadow game. And then they get the deal done and they're the agent. And then what they'll do is they'll sign lifetime contracts with these kids. So they'll take 3% of 4% of earnings lifetime. Which is like, this is like Dominican Republic style stuff, right? Like this is why kids coming up from, Puerto Rico and the DR end up in all these problems later on, because some crazy relative signed some contract with them that took 20% of their lifetime earnings, and then they signed a contract for, $500 million. So it's crazy town right now. So the athletes have the power, but I don't know. There's a lot of bad advice going on. Yes?
You touched on it right there. You convinced us all this is a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
Where are the opportunities within this chaos to capitalize on? And are there certain pockets that have figured this out that are doing much better than other pockets? Just where are the opportunities and to really figure it out?
Yeah. So I think, well, I'll ask the question just because there's so many ways to answer that. But when you talk about opportunities, do you mean for athletes, for the schools, for donors, like which side? Intermediary.
And maybe you can take a moment and talk about what your company does.
Yeah. So I think the visibility component and the integrity component are the 2 biggest problems right there. Right. So so company I'm with now, I'm going to call them kids. They're my bosses, but they graduated from Wake Forest last year. Football players, had 2 buddies get trapped in the transfer portal that never got picked up. Should have just stayed at Wake, but no one advised them any better, and they ended up without a school for a season. Right. So Claude and Cody were like, well, that's a problem. Like, I think we can just build software that does that. Right. So that's an example of the NCAA puts together this transfer portal. And literally, there is no interface to see who's in the portal. And when you submit somebody, when you actually go, it's changed a little bit now, but at first, like the screen that you use to say that, okay, we're actually going to sign this kid off the portal, it looked like the screen that I fill out when I agree to be a book reader for my first grader. Like, it's like 4 fields in a Google form, you know what I mean? Like, go, you know? Insanity. So there is a drastic mismatch between the enormity and scale of what we're talking here, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, you know, and the tooling and visibility of what's out there. So one area that you're seeing a lot of people try to help out in is like, it's like, so our company was like, how do we basically build the transfer portal off to the side, integrate it with the NCAA, and just point everybody at our stuff instead? And then when they hit go, we fill out the Google form for them, basically. So they have a Bloomberg terminal in our platform that allows them to do everything they need to do, put their plan together, and then go forward, okay? So that's one thing. But I think the transparency and integrity piece is, like, these NIL deals, like, they have to be made public. There have to be better ways of reporting back as to how these kids are getting paid. These are public institutions in a lot of cases that are pushing everything under the rug in terms of how that's happening. So I think there's a process component to that. There's a data quality component to it, but probably more than anything, it's just visibility, right? And then you get into like, oh, but the tools could be better, and that's true. But I think a lot of it just starts with like, if I'm a coach or I'm a GM at a school or I'm a donor, is what I'm looking at even correct? If it is correct, what can I do with it? If I can do that with it, what does that mean in the market, right? If I'm really to put this up against like my alternatives and actually think about this as an investment. And then ultimately when I do this, is there any way of me tracking what ROI looks like on that, right? Because we can't just keep doing this and being like, oh yeah, like admissions went up. Okay, great. Did they? You know, is that because you signed that kid? You know, so I think that entire value continuum of what are you looking at? How are you making decisions? Can you even track like the value of those decisions? It's just a mess right now. And those are just like a lot of big gaps. I mean, I'm not kidding you. This is before I was directly involved, I was just advising, but last year in November, zero marketing. I mean, Claude and Cody had like $3 to put together to do this. Like, zero marketing. They had 300 schools use the platform for the December portal. And I would say 200 of them were like, we don't even need to see it. Like, if you have a product that does this, it cannot be worse than the thing I have over here. Like, what does it cost? And you say the number, and they're like, you know, back pocket. Okay, you know, like donor Joe gave me that yesterday in the hallway, you know, like, here you go. Done. That's how desperate it is. So it's you know, schools want to solve it. Yeah. Great. Okay. Way over. Sorry. I skipped over like half the stuff, but thank you so much. I appreciate your time.